Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on our top frequently asked questions with our answers. So a quick bit about us. CertiKit are a leading creator of compliance toolkits, and we provide ISO service based in Derbyshire in the UK. We've helped since 2010 over 7,000 customers globally for both ISOs and data compliance requirements. We specialize in ISO standards, predominantly 27,000, 9, 14, 45, and 22301, and our data protection, GDPR, Cyber Essentials, and NIST. Our mission is to make compliance easy so that more businesses can achieve certification and then benefit from those chosen standards and data protection regulations. And you can find out more about us if you go to our website at CertiKit.com. A bit about myself. I'm Ted. I'm one of the two CertiKit compliance consultants. I look after the 9, 14, 45 and 22301 predominantly, although I do audit 27,001. I am a certified lead auditor for all of those, and I've got about 22 years experience within ISOs. I'm also a certified integrated management implementer, where I can implement 2 or more ISO management systems into an organization. My colleague, Jerry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Joe Lyons. My role is primarily internal audit consultancy and information security implementation consultancy for CertiKit. Although I do focus primarily on 27001 compliance and with our customers. I'm also, or can do, with my past of quality management, do 9001 as well. So my prime role, as it says there, is really to guide customers on implementation of information security management systems, where many clients buy our toolkits and need that help. And I'm also a certified 27001 lead implementer and lead auditor as well.
Cheers, mate. Okay, what are we going to cover today? We're going to look at what it means by implementation. Some people get that a little bit confused. And then we're going to look at the top frequently asked questions that both myself and Jerry have as consultants. And then we'll go into your questions and hopefully we'll be able to have answers for those. So like I said, if you have any questions or you want to ask anything, just drop it in the chat box and we'll get to that when we finish this webinar. So straight in then. So what is implementation? So the definition of implementation is the execution or the practice of a plan, a method, or any design, idea, model, specification, standard, or policy for doing something. And the purpose of implementation is to put that plan, that idea, into action. So turning ideas and evidence into real world policies and practices. It's all about the hows and the whats of a plan. So that's implementation in a nutshell. ISO implementation is actually implanting a management system into an organization. That's what we're going to be looking at, implementation of an ISO management system. So our top ISO questions. So this is what we're going to be talking about. So what is an ISO management system? What are the benefits of implementing the management system? What's the difference between certification and compliance? How long does it take to implement? How much does ISO certification cost? We'll also be looking at what resources are required. Can small organizations implement a management system? What are the common challenges in implementing an ISO? And what documents are required for ISO certification? And then finally, do I need to hire a consultant for an ISO implementation? So we're going to look through those 10 questions in a little bit detail now. And then at the end of that, we'll go quickly through how we do an implementation for our clients, and then into our questions and answers. So the first question then is, what is an ISO management system? Well, as you can see there, an ISO management system is a structured framework based on international standards set by the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, to help organizations manage specific aspects of their businesses, such as quality, environmental, information security, health and safety, energy. Whatever management system you go for, this is what a management system is. So the ISO management system framework typically includes the following elements. So they'll have policies and objectives. They'll have an area for doing planning of the management system and how you address risks and opportunities and planning those. There is implementation and operation. Operation tends to make up the big clause of most standards, clause 8, and this is really where the backbone of your management system is. Then there'll be areas for performance evaluation. All standards have a thing called improvement, continuous improvement, where you need to be seen to be improving your management system. And that's done by performance evaluation. So you'll be looking at how you monitor and measure things against your performance requirements. And then, like I said, improvements, continuously seeking opportunities for the improvement of your management system. What are the key benefits of implementing an ISO management system? Well, there's absolutely lots depending on the different management systems, but I've picked out some of the key benefits here, and I'll mention a couple of others once we've gone through these. So, improved operational efficiency. Implementing a management system involves defining and documenting processes, roles, responsibilities within that organization, your organization. So the clarity of that helps reduce redundancies and inconsistencies, leading to streamlined workflows and more efficient use of resources. Enhanced customer satisfaction and credibility. Obviously, a management system ensures that the organization consistently meets customer expectations and delivers high quality products and services. This is specifically aimed here at 9001, but all management systems drive you to deliver what you're delivering to the best possible way. It has a systematic approach to management. For instance, it helps address in 9001 customer complaints promptly and effectively. That could lead to higher customer satisfaction levels. Risk management and compliance with regulatory requirements. I think everybody online now will know that it's the red tape out there is growing and growing, and it's quite easy to trip over it and fall foul of regulations, especially when it comes to data security. As my colleague Jerry will let you know, information security comes with some very big, hefty caveats. Jerry?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, if you look at things like, you've only got to look at the most common ones like, GDPR and data privacy. Obviously, should you, not implement effective processes in and around, GDPR, which I know is a sort of a separate thing. You can certify and go down a path of doing GDPR compliance. But data privacy is a big part of 27001, and as we all know, if you fail to treat your customers' data securely and confidentially, that can lead to a lot of reputational damage, as well as potentially, particularly if you've are guilty, if you like, of a data breach, then obviously there's potential for huge fines associated with it. So exactly. There's a big part of legal and regulatory compliance and requirement that needs to be part of your management system, and just having those controls and confidence to customers that you've got these controls can, if you like, lead to the next bullet, which is competitive advantage. And it can be used as a differentiator, where if customers are forced to choose between companies that are 27001 compliant, 9001, particularly if you're in manufacturing or service types of industries, then yeah, they are differentiators and can, if they're applied correctly, give you competitive advantage.
Cheers, mate. Another one is to make better decisions through data-driven analysis. The management systems, nearly all of the management systems in Clause 9 and Clause 10, drive you to collect data, to analyze it, to evaluate it, and then to use that data to improve your management system or to improve your decision-making within your organization. So these are some of the key benefits. Other benefits are international recognition. As Jerry was saying, you could stand out. It's becoming more and more a requirement and prerequisite for going for government tenders around the world. We work around the world. I spent 10 years in the Middle East doing this, and a lot of the governments out there were saying that you needed to have 9,000, you had to have 14,000 to go for a government tender. And this is becoming more prolific. So having that and you wanting to go for tenders across borders, it gives you that international recognition. Okay, question 3, what's the difference between ISO certification and compliance? I get asked this an awful lot. So the difference is ISO compliance means that your organization follows the ISO standards, but may not have been formally audited. So it's a voluntary choice. And so an organization decided they are going to follow the guidelines of ISO 14001 environmental management. They put into place all the requirements. They fulfill all the requirements. They put processes in. They look at their impacts and aspects for environmental issues, etc., etc. But they keep it in-house. They monitor it internally. They audit it internally. They don't go for an external certification. You are therefore compliant to that standard. However, if you go for certification, you then have a third party, normally a registered certification body or a registrar, as they're all known, who will come in and audit you against the requirements of that particular standard or standards. And they will evaluate you against the evidence to show that you are fulfilling those requirements. If they're happy with it, they will then recommend you for certification. If not, they will recommend that you go away and fix what's missing or what's broken, and then come back, charge you some more, and then re-audit you or re-audit those parts that were wrong, and then eventually, hopefully, touch wood, recommend you for certification. So ISO compliance, you can fulfill all the requirements, but you don't go for certification. You don't get the badge. You're not allowed to say that you are certified. You can say you comply to, but you can't say you're certified to. ISO certification is that you've taken that next step and you have an external third party, a registered certification body, come in and audit you against the standards. And if you meet those standards, you will then go for certification and get that certificate. But this comes up a lot. A lot of companies go for compliance first and then run with compliance for a year, 2 years, and then go for certification. And it is a good stepping stone, and it also embeds the system a lot quicker. Well, not a lot quicker, but a lot deeper into the organization. But some organizations want to go implementation, certification. So long as the implementation is long enough to gather enough information and evidence to say that they're doing it, there shouldn't be a problem. Okay, question 4. How long does it take to implement an ISO management system? I love this question. How long is a piece of string? Okay, obviously it depends on the size and the complexity of the organization and the actual ISO or ISOs that are being implemented. Typically, in our experience, it takes between 6 months and 18 months.
Smaller organizations potentially down at the 3 to 5 months, medium size 6 months or so, and then larger or complex. And particularly if you've got sort of software development and technological areas to cover off in your scope, then yeah, you can be looking at probably up to a year. But have you got the point about it's the evidence that's the issue, not so much the doing?
Yeah. So these are some of the factors then. So size and structure of the organization, as Jerry was saying, smaller organizations, we can probably, or they can probably, if they've got the resources, and we'll come to that with another question, if they've got the right resources and the knowledge to do it, they can probably implement one in about 3 to 6 months. However, they need to be on the ball to generate enough evidence to show that they're actually doing what they're saying they're doing. Obviously, medium-sized ones, we're looking about 6 to 12 months. But when you come to larger multinational organizations, because of the size of the structure, and they may have multiple satellite offices or organizations around the world, obviously it's going to take longer. Again, this could be mitigated by making sure the scope of the management system is very, very tight and specific. So you may not say that your management system is going to cover the whole of the business, but if you're a multinational, you may say it's only going to cover our head office in London and our satellite office in Paris. The other 3 satellites are going to be listed as interested parties, and that's fair enough. But again, even with just 2 international areas, it's going to take from 12 to 18 months to get that sorted out. Another consideration is what you already have in place. So, and this is one of the reasons we like to do a gap assessment when we're working with our clients, because it's even clients that turn around and say, oh, we haven't got nothing, we're a blank canvas, start from everything from scratch. And as we go through the implementation, lo and behold, they've actually got things in place that they didn't think was relevant to the management system, but were. So having a gap assessment before you start implementation is a good way of finding out what you have got against the requirements, so you can then reduce the amount of implementation time because you've got those things in place. So existing processes and the maturity of the management system in place will make a big difference to implementation. Obviously, conversely, an organization that starts from scratch, I've just said, will obviously need more time to develop documentation, processes, establish controls, and then integrate those into operation on a daily basis, etc. So there's where your timeline can be extended. So it's implementation and then embedment time before you go for certification. Another one, as I said before, is having your internal availability of internal resources and expertise. Very many small businesses, and we do work with a lot of micro companies around the world, 4 or 5 people, like 10 people, they don't have anybody who's got the expertise to implement that. So they do need guidance. Now, this goes on to the question right at the end about consultancy. You can employ a consultant, or you can just muddle through together as a team. But the impact upon that is that then impacts upon your business, because if they're too busy trying to work out what clause 4.3 means in ISO speak, as in business speak, and then put together the requirements of that, document it, etc., you're taking them away from the core business. So there's a balance there you have to find. How desperate are you to implement it, and how well do you want to implement it? How much are you prepared to spend to bring somebody with expertise in to help do that?
Yeah, the other caveat on that one is sometimes companies want to engage with consultants like yourself to help, particularly if we've had companies as little as less than 5 people. But they always say, well, what can you do to implement a system, but don't bother me. Well, it's sort of not our business model necessarily to go and write your management system for you. That's not the way CertiKit works. I know there are a lot of consultancies out there that do, but I've been the victim of inheriting in previous roles and in my information security manager and quality management roles in previous companies I worked for, And I've often found those management systems are not worth the paper they're written on, because they've not been written by the people that actually do the processes. So there's
Or
a bit
had
of
an
a
input into
trade-off
it.
with this, is that yes, a micro company, you can necessarily not, well, if you take 27001, which warrants the use of not just the management system parts of the standard, but the Annex A controls. A small company may actually be able to reduce the number of controls, therefore reduce the number of resources and requirements, because the number of controls that actually are applicable be a lot less. So yes, that can save the company time, but the downside is if they expect you to come in and write the management system and not bother them very much, then clearly it's not going to be a very effective management system. So yeah, the internal resources, company size, and the structure has a huge bearing on not only the implementation time, but how effective it is for us as consultants sometimes to add the value in, because of those reasons.
Yeah, another one then is the standard you're actually trying to implement. Some of the standards are quite straightforward, and some of them are really complex. If you take, for instance, if you're an organization and you're focused on quality, you have a big quality department, implementing 9001 is not going to be a major headache, because you should actually be doing a lot of what you're doing. But for a company that hasn't got that, or wants to implement 9001, it has one of the longest clause 8 requirements of all the standards. It has 7 subclauses, whereas in 27,000 there's only 3 subclauses in clause 8. So the standard could have an impact on the amount of time that it takes to implement it. Stage of certification. There's 2 stages of certification, and depending on where you are in certification, in your journey, will depend on how long your certification process will take. Your stage 1 is where the certification body will look at all your documentation, and if you've passed that, then they'll do stage 2. And then change management and employee engagement. One of the biggest problems, and it's another question, is resistance. How do we overcome resistance? I'm a great believer is working from bottom to top, getting the people at the bottom involved and getting their back in, because the top should follow. The top's already dictated they wanted it, but the groundswell needs to come from the ground. So early involvement of staff, early awareness to the staff of what's happening, why they're happening, engaging them by getting them to have their input into their processes. Don't go in and say, right, as I've seen done before, somebody come up to a person who's been doing a process for like 5 or 6 years, give them a document, right, there's your process document, you need to follow that. And as the person was following it, they'd missed out chunks, because the person who wrote it only thought he knew what the process required. It was the person who was doing the process is the one that should have had the input into the document. So one way of getting employee engagement is actually stroking their egos by saying, we need your input to get this document. So we're going to sit with you to document what you're doing, so that people coming behind you will be following in your footpath, and you need to lay it down properly. You'll get engagement that way. But change management, employee engagement is a pretty important factor. Okay, halfway through now with question 5. How much does certification cost? Yeah, let me think about that one. It's a really good question. There's lots of different factors. There really is a lot of different factors. Again, size and complexity of your organization, because that's going to impact on your implementation time. Implementation costs time, and therefore time costs money. So there's one major factor. Choice of certification body. Both me and Jerry got lots of stories about certification bodies. The most expensive is not necessarily the best, and the cheapest is not necessarily the worst, but the prices between the best and the worst vary so much.
Scary.
you've got to think about certification costs are based over a 3-year period. Certification is your year one, you get your certification. 12 months later, you get your first surveillance audit. 12 months after that, you get your second surveillance audit. The year after that, you get your recertification and you go back into that cycle. Certificate, surveillance, certificate, surveillance. So you're paying for a 3-year cycle, and it's not cheap, depending on the audit body.
I think all cert bodies as well tie you in typically to at least take you from one 3-year cycle to your next, but it's up to you then at the end of that 3 years if you want to carry on with that cert body, but they generally try to tie you in, don't they?
Yeah.
I think the 3 years.
Big time. Yeah, you need to be careful. You need to choose a certification body that is relevant to your organization and your business sector, because it's no good having a certification body. I worked with a bakery in Jebel Ali in Dubai, and we were inputting 9001 and 22,000 food safety management system. And they went looking for an auditing body, and they got the cheapest one against our recommendations. We give them a list of good certification bodies, because as consultants, we can't recommend a certification body, but we can give you a list of the ones that are good out there, and then you go and choose them out of that. But they went for the cheapest one, and they brought somebody in who had a manufacturing background. They didn't know nothing about food safety. They got the certification because they were cheap, and they wanted to tie them in for 3 years. Didn't do them much good, to be honest. It was just a paper exercise. So when you look for your certification bodies, look for one that fits your business and shop around. And when you find that, when you ask one of the questions you ask certification bodies, do you have auditors that audit against this standard within this business sector?
Yeah, that's
and if they say, yeah, like IS, information security, people say, oh, well, it's the same across the world. Different business sectors are all the same. It's not. There are different considerations. I'm sure Jerry will agree with me. Aerospace, your information security is going to be a lot bigger than a consultancy. Something else you need to consider is training and consultancy fees. Training, you may have to put some of your staff through training courses to get them skilled up to fulfill their roles within the management system. So you need to consider that. You may bring on consultants. You've got to consider their fees within that. Internal resources needed for implementation. And again, I mentioned this before. If you're using your own resources, you've got to think, I'm taking him from his job or her job. I'm asking them to do this. It's taking them 6 hours to do that. So 6 hours out of their job. How much is 6 hours out of their job? That's the financial burden of that person doing that 6-hour thing. You've got to think about that when you're looking at your costings as well.
Yeah, and we find this is the biggest factor that influences question 4. How long does it take? Because what we, as consultants, we work with a lot of clients, and some have got very, dedicated resource with lots of allocated time. We have other ones that are trying to fit it in with a day job, and it's that often impacts on, well, we want a meeting to talk about risk management or whatever, and we've got it all scheduled in, and then that gets cancelled because they're busy. And so again, the more distractions an internal resource has is going to impact the duration of the project as well.
Yeah, so you can see there then total costs can range from a few $1,000s or pounds up to tens of thousands of dollars or pounds. Okay, home stretch now. Question 6. What resources are required for ISO implementation? So these are some that you should be thinking about. A dedicated project team. Having a team of people on your implementation project makes it easier to implement because they are focused. You're not pulling people off. Right, go and do this. Then they come back and they go and do something else. Have a team if you can. Think about time for training and process development. So training of the staff to bring them up to compliance and competency within their roles, but also your process developments. You're now utilizing those employees, you're engaging with them who are doing processes to develop your documentation within those processes. So there's a bit of engagement with employees there. Think about your budget for external auditing and certification fees. We mentioned that. So there's another resource, your budget. This is one that we come across quite often, and we don't get asked this by the management. We get asked this by the people implementing the management system, who are not necessarily the managers, or sorry, executive managers. Management commitment and involvement. And I will say categorically, and Jerry will back me up on this, clause 5.1 of every single ISO management system states that the executive management are responsible for the resourcing, sourcing of and competency of materials and people for that management system. The buck stops with senior management. So management must be committed. And it's like Jerry was saying before, that somebody will say, yeah, we want you to implement it. You get on with it and don't talk to me. That's not how we work, because we engage with executive management all the way through implementation. And we encourage the people implementing the management system to engage with senior management, executive management through a steering committee. So management commitment and involvement is paramount, and it is a resource that definitely needs to be tapped into. Internal auditors for ongoing compliance. 9.2 of all the standards, internal auditing requires that the management system is audited on a regular basis to ensure its effectiveness and efficiency and compliance to the requirements of the standard. Now, small businesses, 5, 6 people, don't tend to be able to have 2 people spare to go and do an auditing course to be auditors. You have to have a minimum of 2 people because you can't audit yourself. It has to be an independent auditor. So you have to have 2 people from different areas of a business to be able to come and audit each other. Bigger companies can do that. Companies that have got quality departments tend to have auditors, but they have to be able to audit against the standard, not just against what the requirements of the business is. So they still need to go on some sort of auditor training for the specific standards. Or you can get a second party in. It's something we do a lot of second party auditing for our clients, where we act as their internal auditors. We're totally independent because we don't belong to the company. So you've got to think about internal auditors for ongoing compliance. So those are the sort of resources you need to think about for implementation. There are others, but those are like the main ones. Question 7, another good one. Can small organizations implement an ISO management system? I think we've already mentioned it about 30 times in the last half hour. Yeah, you can. ISO management systems are scalable and they can be tailored to fit the size of the business, the complexity of the business, and also the needs of that business. So small businesses can implement the ISO standards, and they can do so by simplifying the processes to fit their operations. Now, most standards, clause 8.1 says that these organization will identify those processes and procedures that are required for the effective and efficient running of the management system. It's up to the business then to decide what are those key critical processes. Now, each management system alone will have sort of some key processes that they're going to be looking for. For quality, they're obviously going to be looking for design and development, delivery, customer satisfaction, those sort of things, because they're key to quality. Information security, they're going to be looking for, like, how your risk process and your risk treatment process, because they're key to information security. The same with health and safety, the same with environmental management. It's up to the organization to decide which ones they're going to document. So if a small organization, they'd only document the ones that could be critical to their business within the aspect of that management system, and not anything else. My rule of thumb, and I tell this to all my clients, don't over document, because the more you document, the more you get audited. The more they audit you, the more they can find, because you've got lots of documents and somebody may not have fulfilled a requirement. So only document the critical processes necessary for that management system. And then as you grow, you add extra processes and procedures and documented procedures to enhance that management system.
To be fair, there are some that, there are a number of areas that are mandatory,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you've got to do them. But again, it's about scalability in that case. Don't implement for a small organization an overly complex process for doing whatever that process needs to do. Make it as efficient as it can be given the size and the resources that work in that particular structure.
The other thing with smaller businesses is don't underestimate the amount of time it's going to take to implement it. Be realistic. Just do it slowly and do it properly and build upon it. Question 8. What are the common challenges in implementing an ISO? So this is a multiple sort of multi-choice question. So common challenges that we see are a lack of management commitment. I think I've already explained that. They've got to be seen to be led by leading the ISO management system. Resistant to change from employees. Failure to engage employees at the beginning of an implementation is leading to failure, honestly, because they'll just put their backs up. You could implement it, you get certified, and they're just not fulfilling their role. And when you come for your first audit, an auditor will see that, and you'll just get NCs all over the place. Engage early on, rub their egos up, get them involved in the documentation and the implementation. Insufficient resources and expertise. Well, this goes back to like smaller businesses, even some bigger businesses. That you don't get big by spending lots of money. That's what I was told by somebody. So if you're not going to budget for the resources required for it, it's not going to happen really quickly. You've got to think about these things. And also, do you have the in-house expertise? If you don't, you need to go and find it. It may not be from consultants. It may be from another business who's implemented it, that you go and ask them, how did you implement it? Consultancy isn't the be all and end all to getting the information. Loads of books out there, some really good webinars that me and Jerry have done that'll tell you how to do it. Complex documentation requirements. No. Keep it simple. Keep the KISS idea. Keep it simple, stupid. Only document what is required. Like Jerry said, there are mandatory requirements. Have those covered off, and then document the critical processes necessary for the efficient running of that management system. And then as you grow, as you get bigger, as it gets settled, introduce more and more and more, but not to start with. I've gone into businesses, especially in the UAE, where they've had a consultant go in, they've got almost bought a certification, and then they've decided to go for another certification body because the other one was more expensive, and the certification body's come in and said, oops, these books are no good, this documentation is no good because you're a printer and these documentations are for a manufacturer, because they hadn't bothered to open the ones that the consultants did. And it was super complicated. Just keep it simple. If you keep it simple, people will use them. You make them complicated, people will not use them. Misalignment with business objectives. This is the big one. All the standards ask you that you, in 6.2 for your objectives, should be aligned to the strategic direction of the business by improving the management system in question to align with it. So you try and align your business objectives and your management objectives with that strategic direction. We've seen some real doo-doos in the past, haven't we, mate?
Yep. Spaghetti.
So addressing some of these challenges, it requires planning. You've got to talk amongst yourselves to get it sorted out and come up with an action. It requires clear communication, top to bottom, not just at the top and not just at the bottom. It's got to be clear up and down. That's one of the biggest things I've seen in implementation, is the lack of communication from executive management to the implementation team to the business. It has to be clear. And then you've got to think about your ongoing support from that top management. Clause 5.1, stick it under their nose and say, look, that's your responsibility. You've got to help us. Almost done. Question 9 then. What documents are required for ISO certification? We've just mentioned lots of documents, but there are, as Jerry said, there are some necessary standards, necessary requirements. Here are some of them. Policy statements. Every standard has a policy. So you have a quality policy for 9001, information security for 27001, health and safety for 45, environmental policy for 14, business continuity policy for 22301, etc. Your main policy document. Then if you look at 27,000, they have a bucket full of policies for all of their information security requirements, and they are required. So there are policy statements and policy documents you need to think about. Processes and procedures. There are necessary processes and procedures. 9001, there's a mandatory procedure for supplier evaluation. And then there are, throughout all of the documents, it says these must be documented, or documented evidence must be maintained. That's ISO speaker saying it has to be documented. So there's a internal audit schedule. That's a requirement that has to be documented. Your critical processes, clause 8.1, have to be documented. But all of these sort of things are requirements. Records of internal audits. Yes, that's another requirement of 9.2. You have to maintain records to show that you've completed internal audits. You have to complete records for management reviews or corrective actions. That's clause 10.1 of all the standards. But throughout the documentation, throughout the standard, there are requirements for records that you've done things. You have to show in 27,000, you have to have an asset registry. In 45,000, you have to have a health and safety register. So these are documents. So every standard has their own required documents. And one that goes across the board are training records. Clause 7.2, which in all the standards, which is competency. And these are the competencies of the people who have roles within the standard, not within the business as a whole, but within the standard, the management standard that you're implementing. And 9 times out of 10, when you start implementation, the people that you've chosen for roles, like your health and safety manager, may not have an official health and safety certificate. And the management has decided, well, we want him to have a certificate. There must be a training record to show that when he started the job, this was his competency level, and then he went under training, he got the certificate, and his competency level has now risen to the required of the standard. So training records, again, is an important record that need to be maintained. And risk assessments. All the standards have risks and opportunities, clause 6.11, but in other standards, like in 27,000, in 45,000, in 14,000, there are specific risks that need to be assessed. Jerry?
Yeah, and the biggie with the biggie with 27K is obviously the risk assessment itself, because that forms the fundamental backbone of what you do to select controls and that sort of thing. But more importantly, some of the other mandatory things are, demonstrating that for the risks that you're going to treat, that you've got effective treatment plans and sort of assessment of, if you like, residual risk and that sort of thing. So other things like incident policies, acceptable use of assets, and sort of general user policies, that advise users what they can and can't do, are quite proliferate the way through their standard. So most of those are additional to some of the ones that have been listed here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, final question then. Do I need to hire a consultant for ISO implementation? Yeah, of course you do. Well, no. Hiring a consultant is not mandatory, but it can be helpful, especially if your organization lacks experience within ISO standards. A consultant can bring and guide you through the process, help you with documentation, can conduct pre-audits, can bring lots of
knowledge, templates,
knowledge, experience, good practice, and things like that.
Yeah.
Can help shorten the amount of time it takes to implementation, but you don't have to employ a consultant. Again, with all consultancies, it's the same as when you're looking for a certification body. Do your homework. Not all consultants do the same things. Like Jerry said before, we will not write your documents for you. What we will do is sit with you to populate the documents and put them in the format that would be acceptable for audits. And in certain places, we may say, right, have you thought about doing it this way? Have you thought about that? And bring some good practices into it, because we know what an auditor is looking for. But we need your information, your knowledge of your business and your processes to be able to have that in that document. So we won't do it for you, but we will tell you and guide you and assist you in populating those documents.
Yeah, for implementation, hiring a consultant is not necessarily mandatory, but it's I think one of the things I find with a lot of clients is it depends on what expertise is in-house. If somebody, for example, has been tasked with, implementing a management system, it's a lonely, scary place. If you've been left on your own to deal with it and you're not the most familiar with the standard, what it requires, what the process is, it's a bit like the day when you take learn to drive and taking your driving test. You've got to read the highway code, you've got to understand what to do, what happens when you get in the car and start driving it. And if you just threw you in a car and said, here, drive it, it's a scary place. And I think consultancy for the ISO standards is a little bit the same sort of thing, in that if you've got the in-house expertise, for example, we've worked with companies that have got, qualified CISOs. They're really on the ball when it comes to cyber security, probably in some ways way more knowledgeable than me in some areas, which is to be expected because that's their background. Those guys are really great to work with, because they bring their expertise to the part in everything else, and they could probably do most of it on their own. But for organizations that don't have that skill set in-house, they don't have those resources, a consultant is your sort of shoulder to cry on, shall we call it. Someone who you can go to, you can work with, and it makes the journey, if you like, a little bit more pleasant whenever you've not got that expertise.
Cheers, mate. Okay, last thing then before we go into questions and answers then is we get asked what are the steps to implementation. We have a set format. I'm just going to quickly go through these quick steps. I'm not going to go into any depth, but to give you an idea what they are. So we start off with a project implementation. We sit down with people. We talk about what they've got, the resources required, the time, etc., etc. Then we work our way through the standard, and we work clause by clause by clause, because we know that each clause preceding the next clause has information that is required to keep it going. So we start at clause 4 of the standards. Clause 4 to 10 are what we implement in all the management standards. The first 3 is just information. So clause 4 is scope and interested parties and exclusions. We start there, we gather and help gather that information, help document that. Then we go into clause 5, which is leadership. That's where the policies, the quality, the management policies sits. The leadership commitment is in there, and the roles and responsibilities of people within the management sits in there. So we help look at that, revise that, and help document that. Then we go into clause 6, which is risk and opportunities. Depend on what standard you're in. It could be your risk treatment for your information security, and risk assessments are in there. But also in there are objectives and change management. So we look at those with the people we're working with. We then go into clause 7, which is predominantly more like HR and admin type thing. But in there, we have our competencies for the people in the management system, which works with clause 5. So if we didn't have those roles and responsibilities, we wouldn't have the information required for this clause to be able to fulfill the competency stuff. Awareness is in there. That's staff awareness from top to bottom. And that's for everybody in the business, not just in the management system, for everybody in the business. Communications. And then the big one is documented information, 7.5. And we have that as a separate step because there's a lot of information. How you document your information is important. So there are, like, within our toolkits, there are templates and things like that to help streamline that sort of thing. And then we go into the next step, which is operational, which is clause 8. And this is where the standards change because they are specific to the standard. And we sit and help look at clause 8.1 and help identify the key critical processes and procedures that need to be documented. And then we help work the way through the rest of the clause. Then we go to clause 9, which is performance efficiency. So we look at performance review. In here, in 9001 is customer satisfaction. So that's a biggie for that. But 9.2 is internal audits. So we help them establish an internal audit register, schedule, and how they're going to complete those audits. We also help them with their management review, which is a mandatory requirement as well, where you have a set number of inputs that you have to have and a set number of expected outputs that you could be audited against. And then we look at the final one, which is assessment and action plans. So clause 10 is continual improvement and actions to correct non-conformities. Once we've got that done, we then go back and do a complete review of the gap assessment that we did at the start back here on the implementation, just to see if there's any holes. And then actions from that are to fill those holes. And then finally, planning for certification. Normally, when I'm working with a client, I'm starting here talking to them about this. Have you started looking for a certification body? Because these two, performance review and improvement, two of the shortest clauses in all the standards, they can get pretty much done in a week or so. So around about here, towards the end of clause 8, but definitely when we start clause 9, I will be asking them, have you started looking at your certification body? Start looking for them, shortlisting the ones you're interested in. So that's our sort of go-to implementation step. I can say with hand on heart, no two implementations are the same. Every company is different. Even from the same sector, producing the same stuff, they've got different ways of doing it. So you've got to be flexible. And you need to be flexible if you're going to do your implementation yourself, flexible and have that leeway and time to be able to do it properly. So to summarize what we've covered today then is we've defined what an implementation is. We've showed the purpose of the implementation. That was the first slide. We then went through the top frequently asked questions that we've seen over the past 2 years. Giving you an overview of how we go through an implementation process, those 10 steps. So just before going to questions then, these are the 4 areas that we could help with people that want to implement. So we offer a range of comprehensive toolkits, and these include all documents, template guides needed to comply with the chosen standard or regulation. With a perpetual license, ongoing support package includes unlimited email support, ongoing updates. We review 3 completed documents for free, and then full access to our video library that has got all the webinars and stuff like that on. If you do go for our toolkit, we then provide a logo replacement. All of our toolkits up here, as you can see, it's got like a CertiKit thing up here. That could be changed to your logo. And inside of all the documents, there are placeholders for your company's name. So you can actually tailor your documentation to your own business. And that's another service we provide. This is our service. Me and Jerry, we provide the ISO servicing. So we provide a wide range of ISO services such as implementation projects, gap assessments, ad hoc days. internal audits or full pre-certification audits. We conduct our services remotely via Teams, unless requested to come on site. But if we're doing it remotely, then it's plus or minus 5 hours the UK time. So 5 hours plus or minus BST at the moment, but come Sunday, it'd be plus or minus 5 hours GMT.
That covers Europe quite well, and East Coast US.
Middle East.
We have done wider, but you know,
Yeah.
it's mainly there.
And then we got anybody who's implementing 27,000. This is our latest offering, which is a cyber awareness training platform. And actually, we use this ourselves, and it's quite good. In fact, it's really good. Cyberto is one of my favorite people. So you could subscribe to our cyber awareness training platform to calculate, reduce, and monitor human cyber risks within your organization. The annual subscription is priced per user, and that includes the following modules. So you get cybersecurity awareness training, you get a phishing simulator, you get breach monitoring, you get policy management, and you get real-time reporting. As a user of this end, as an end user of this, I get a training, and it's a 2 or 3 minute training video. Sometimes it's a cartoon, sometimes it's a person doing it on specific cyber security topics. And then you get a quiz at the end of it to see if you've understood it. And you get a certificate at the completion of the quiz to say how well you've done.
And the company gets a risk score as well. So the more you do well in the quizzes and generally show your skills and aptitude, then your risk score, you can see the little dial on that diagram there, your sort of risk score as an individual goes down. So
yeah. So those are the 4 areas where we can help.